to bring a korban, what's called an asham. Certain korbanot, not certain, most korbanot are mandatory. Most korbanot are mandatory. You don't have a choice. You have to bring the korban. If you're chayav to bring the korban, you have to bring the korban. The Torah itself, just about everything in the Torah is mandatory, and the Torah is very precise. If you have an etrog, if it's got a black dot, it's possible. A brown dot, it's kosher. Right? Little changes. When you put on tefillin, so the tefillin is not allowed to go down past the front of the hairline, where the hairline ends, or once ended, as the case may be. But the tefillin is not allowed to go down. The Torah is very precise. The mezuzah has to be put up on an angle. Every letter in the Torah has to be. All of a sudden, the Torah, which is precise, the Torah is demanding which shoe you put on first, your right shoe, your left shoe. The Torah is pretty precise. They asked Pinchas. They asked Rav Pinchas what he would do if he found out he wasn't Jewish. Everybody's had that idea. What if I found out that they asked Rav Pinchas if he found out his mother's mother had been a Reformed conversion, what would he do? So we've all thought about that. We usually think in terms of, let's see, which food would I eat? That's right. If I was a goy for a day, what would I do? Which form of food? By me, it's Kentucky Fried Chicken. Okay, whatever. Everybody's got their thing they've thought of. So they asked Rav Pinchas, what would he do? So Pinchas said, I'm sure this is the answer that you all thought of. He said he would build a bama. There's a one-stone korban, one-stone altar, and he would bring a korban, because only a goy could bring a korban on a bama, and after serving Hashem the best way that a goy could serve him, then he would convert to become a Jew. Isn't that the first thing that went through your mind when I asked you, what would you do if you became a goy? Oh yeah, they have definitely that bama. Now we think more in terms of, a bama cheeseburger, bama. But okay, that was what he said. So they asked Reb Chaim Zimmerman. Reb Chaim Zimmerman once said, it was a big genius. Reb Chaim Zimmerman was a legend. Chaim Zimmerman said, I would tie my right shoe before my left shoe. That's what Reb Chaim Zimmerman, that's what he'd do if one day he was a goy. So if you found out he was a goy. So the Torah, you see that the Torah is very precise. By the way, somebody once said, this is no Jew, no matter how much fun goyim have, no matter how enjoyable life is for goyim, no goy in history will ever experience the joy and the pleasure of hearing a clap at the end of Shemona Esrei that there's no V'hu Rachum on Monday or Thursday. No goy in history will ever have that joy. That feeling you get when all of a sudden there's a clap. No, a chassan. Everybody okay, go. No V'hu. And all of a sudden everybody's upbeat. All of a sudden everybody in shul feels good. Nobody even cares chassan here, chassan there. Who cares? There's always one frum guy who's saying, "Why aren't we saying tachana?" No, be quiet. Will you just be quiet? It's like that guy in class, right at the end of class, who always says, "Isn't there any homework? Would you be quiet?" There's always one guy like that. So Judaism is very, very precise. Judaism is very precise. So the Stipler Zatzal asks the following questions. Parshas Vayikra begins with the idea of a korban olah. A korban olah. A korban olah means that you can volunteer a korban. A korban olah means that you can volunteer a korban. Now, why do you volunteer? I mean, you're in a good mood for whatever reason. You're in a good mood. Your team won a game. You could volunteer a korban. You decide, you were driving and there was no traffic that day. So you volunteer a korban. I'm going to bring. Person says Lamashal, I'm going to bring a calf. I'm going to bring a meal offering to the basement. You volunteer a korban. Ask the Stipler, what's with the volunteering? What do you mean you volunteer? Where do you find volunteering? We're told what to do. This is what you have to do. This is what you don't do. Why are you volunteering? That's the Stipler's question. So, the answer to the question is like this. The answer to the question is like this. If you stop and think to yourself, did you ever hear the idea of Godol HaMitzuva V'Oseh? Greater is one who is obligated to do something than one who's not obligated to do it. Godol HaMitzuva V'Oseh. So let me ask you a question. Imagine you walk into a shul. There are two men. You see two men davening. One of the guys is putting on his tefillin, opens up his siddur. Okay, that's the first guy. You have the second guy who's over there like this. He's putting on his tefillin. Kissing anything that moves, right? Right? Put down his film, he opens up his like that. Then I ask you, I want you to know a piece of information. One of these guys is a FFB, he's a frum from birth, and the other one is a Baal Tshuva. And you have to just guess which one is which. What would you say?
The yawning one is the FFB. Yeah.
What's that?
The one that
the one that's yawning is the FFB, right? Everybody was saying the guy who's all enthusiastic, he's the Baal Tshuva, right? And if you had a bet, you would bet, right? Now, why is that? Why is that? So there's a superficial answer and there's a deeper answer. The superficial answer is we think, well, you know, the FFB, you know, he went to Valley and he's already been doing it his whole, everything is, you know, Israel. The Baal Tshuva, it's all new, so he's excited about it, okay? That's certainly the superficial answer. There's a deeper answer over here, and if you understand this answer, you understand a Yesod in Avodas Hashem. Now, there's a principle in serving a Kodesh Baruch. Anything in life that a person does, the Gemara says, Godol ha-mitzvah v'osa, one who is obligated to do something gets greater reward than one who's not obligated to do it. So you have a man who takes a lulav and an esrog, and a woman takes a lulav and an esrog, the man gets greater reward. Psychologically, we would think it's opposite. We think the volunteer, you know, if you volunteer for something, you should be a national hero. The Torah says it's not like that. The Torah says if you have to do it, then you get greater reward. You know why that is? Imagine a husband on Motzei Shabbos. Motzei Shabbos, there's a sink full of dishes. And the husband decides he's going to become also a national hero. He's going to surprise his wife and he's going to do the dishes. All right, we're into science fiction here, Chaim, I understand. But imagine a husband's going to surprise his wife. So he walks over to the dishes and he starts rolling up his sleeves and he's getting all ready to dive in. He's even going to use soap. And he's about to do the dishes, and all of a sudden he hears his wife's voice from the other room and says, Chaim, can you do the dishes, please? What happens at that moment? You let all the air out of the balloon. Why? Because you were going to surprise her, right? You were going to do it. Now she asked you to do it. But you were going to do it anyway, so what changed? The answer is, what changed is that now you're a mitzvah v'osa. Up till that point, you were a volunteer. That means, when a person volunteers to do something, you do it with more enthusiasm. Once you have to do it, it takes a little bit of it drains the enthusiasm from it. Comes along the Torah. You stop and think about it. It's like that in Pesach cleaning if you have to help in the house or whatever you have to do. As soon as you have to do something, then it takes some of the fun out of it. So you got to what do you call it? Pesach cleaning, or if you have to go to shul. That's why the Baal Tshuva, when he davens with greater enthusiasm. Do you know why? Because in his heart of hearts, the Baal Tshuva is thinking to himself, I don't really have to be doing this. Hashem will not blame me if I was 25 when I found out about Yiddishkeit. And therefore, I'm volunteering it. Therefore, he does it with greater enthusiasm.
It's not fair.
It's not fair. You know when I know that a Baal Tshuva has become an FFB? The day he comes into Shir and he yawns. When he falls asleep in Shir, I know he's now from. Now he's it. That's it. He's made it. He's from. He's officially from. You can count him in a minion now. He's it. He's it. Right? As soon as if a guy is in Shir and a guy's like this, and if a guy's yawning in Shir, he's absolutely from. A guy who's interested is a Baal Tshuva. And a guy who's like this, a guy who's leaning forward with his eyes open, he's a goy. Gotta check his yichud. I mean, a guy sits there in Shir and says, wow, this is really fit. This is really amazing. Guy's not even Jewish, right? Gotta check his yichud. I mean, something was wrong. All the time. It always happens with the goy murder guy. The Jewish guy argues. The goy listens. He accepts everything. So a person has to know. You have to know that it's a fundamental psychological. It's a psychological principle in human behavior. Now, that brings us to the Korban Olah. The Korban Olah means that the Stipler, and this is the Stipler's idea, not my idea. Stipler says, in Yiddishkeit, the goal of Yiddishkeit is to make the connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the goal. They have a connection. We have to have a connection with Hashem. We have to what he calls dveikus. We have to have a connection. Where is your strongest connection going to be? We all have to daven, we all have to put on tefillin, we all have to learn Torah, we all have to do all those mitzvahs. But you're going to find an area somewhere in life that you feel is your area where you're volunteering, where you're doing a little more than required. So for some people it's to do chesed. For some people, it's to be very, very medactic, very precise in halacha. You ever see people look for a lulav and esrog for 3 days? They can be looking for a lulav and an esrog. They're looking it over. Every time they wash their hands, they make sure to dry their hands before they wash it to the sidayim and make sure they get it to the thing, which is fine. It's beautiful. That's where their energy is. And because they're going above and beyond the letter of the law, that's where you're going to have the strongest connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The connection is going to be in the area where you feel that you're volunteering. Some people give more tzedakah than they have to. Some people learn Torah around the clock, and because they learn Torah around the clock more than the minimum, that's where your connection is going to be to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Steipler says you have to make that. You have to make that. That's the idea behind the Korban Olah, that the Torah allows us an area of what we call volunteering. Is it warm in here, by the way? Good, as long as it's not me.
So how come the Torah specifies a korban which relates more to like davening, rather than kind of bring your own form of a korban? Like korban seems very specific in that, but it's not really.
Good
like
question.
choose
Good question.
your own.
But why dafka in this area? I don't know. But you see that it does apply now. Maybe just leave the door open, Chaim.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think so. So get some here. Why dafka in this area? I don't know. That's a good question. But the Steipler is using that as a trigger point, just as an example of the concept of. You see, it could be because since we're talking about korbanos, it says adam ki yakriv. The word korban, the root of the word korban is karov. So it's specifically by the korbanos that you can come closer by bringing a korban olah. It could be that's the reason he uses that as the springboard. Now, that being the case, I'll tell you an interesting story. It's a Hasidic story, an apocryphal story, but a very interesting story. There was a prince and a princess were living together in the palace. And they were living together nicely. They loved each other. There was only one problem. The princess was sloppy. She never cleaned up the house. The house was always a mess, stuff all over the floor. Princess never cleaned up. Why didn't they have servants? It's a good question. Gosh, right? But they didn't have servants, and she never cleaned up. The prince was getting fed up. So one day he comes over to the princess. He says, "All right, you're gonna have to start cleaning up, or I'm gonna throw you out of here." The princess is lying on the couch. She's lying on the couch with the Reader's Digest reading, and the prince is getting a little impatient. And he comes over, he goes into the kitchen, he walks out, and he's holding a giant cookie. And he says to her, "Listen, I'm going to eat this cookie. By the time I finish eating this cookie, you haven't started cleaning up, I'm throwing you out of here." Takes a bite out of the cookie, leans over. He's lying on the couch with the Reader's Digest, takes another bite, keeps on eating the cookie. Finally, finishes the cookie, says, "You got to clean up?" She goes, "No." Says, "Guards, banish her." So the guards come over, they take the princess, they throw her out. Okay, the next day, the prince regrets it. He loves his princess. The problem is they have a law in the land that once you throw out a princess, you're not allowed to take her back. So now he's got a problem. He threw her out, and he loves her, wants to take her back, he doesn't know what to do. So he calls in the first wise man, he says, "What should I do? I threw out the princess, I want her back." The first wise man says, "I have nothing I can do for you." Calls in the second wise man, "What can I do?" "Nothing I can do." But calls in the Jewish wise man. The Jewish wise man says to him, "Tell me something. Was it a hard cookie or was it a soft cookie?" Does that really make a difference? I mean, you want to know if it had chocolate chips? I mean, what's the difference? It was a cookie. He says, "Answer my question." He says, "Well, it was a hard cookie." He says, "Good. If it was a hard cookie, that means there had to have been crumbs that fell. If crumbs fell, that means you never finished your condition, because your condition was you'll eat the whole cookie. When you finished a cookie, you never finished a cookie, there are crumbs. If you never finished a cookie, there are crumbs. That means the condition never kicked in. You could take her back, you never fulfilled the condition." So I say there are two important lessons in this story. Lesson number one is all women should always bake hard cookies when they bake cookies. Cookies should be hard cookies. And lesson number two is that there are always crumbs lying around. There are crumbs of Yiddishkeit to be picked up everywhere. Little crumbs of mitzvahs that can be picked up everywhere. A little bit more learning, a little of davening, chesed, tzedakah, halacha. There are crumbs all over the place. And you could pick up any crumbs you want because there's room to volunteer. You don't have to, you're not limited to doing it the way you're told to do it only in this area. Any area that you decide that you would like to volunteer, not only it's acceptable, it makes a stronger connection between you and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So for example, let's say one of you volunteers, you're going to come in and you're going to clean up the shul. I'm not saying you should do this. You come in and clean up the shul once a week. You'll put away the Sidurim. You'll feel good about yourself because you're volunteered. Nobody told you to do it. Somebody decides you're going to come in and you're going to learn an extra half hour of Mishnayos every Monday. Right? You'll feel good about that half hour. That's your half hour because that's above and beyond what you normally do and above and beyond what you're obligated to do. That's waiting for us everywhere you go. That's waiting. It's just lying out there. There's lying out there to be swept up and gathered. There are two problems here. Problem is that the society around us does not encourage that sort of behavior. The society around us is not a society that's busy. They're picking up crumbs. Some of them are crumbs, but they're not. It's not a society that's encouraging that kind of devotion. In our society, if you got an extra half hour, you make another half hour's worth of money. Right? There are crumbs around. There are money crumbs all over. That's a society that we live in. Other than the other pursuits of the society, which I don't want to get into, but that's certainly one of the pursuits of the society. So there was a Rebbe in a Rosh Yeshiva was once walking with a Talmud of his, and it was in Yerushalayim years ago. So the Rebbe points out in the distance, and he sees there's a shepherd. Says to his Talmud, "What do you see over there?" Talmud says, "I see an Arab shepherd boy on a hill." He says, "How old do you think that kid is?" It's off in the distance, a little Arab kid. He says, "I don't know, maybe 11 years old, 12 years old." He says, "Okay. How many sheep do you think he has around him?" I don't know, 200, 250. Okay. How many hours a day do you think he's with the sheep? I don't know. The shepherds work, shepherds 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours. They're out there all day with the sheep. So the Rebbe says, "I don't understand something. Can I ask you a question? There's an 11-year-old kid surrounded by 250 sheep. 8 hours, 10 hours a day. That we agree. So wouldn't you expect that by this point the sheep all walk on all fours? Wouldn't you expect that he'd be influenced by the sheep and that he should be walking on all fours also? I mean, after all that time surrounded by sheep, don't you expect to be walking on all fours?" So Thomas says, "Yeah, that's a good question." So Rebbe says, "So why doesn't he?" Tom says, "I don't know. I guess because he sees that they're animals and he's different. So he doesn't do what animals do, no matter how many there are, no matter how many he's surrounded by." So Rebbe says, "Never forget that in life. Never forget that in life. The fact that everybody's doing it, and the fact that we're surrounded by two-legged animals, but if we see ourselves as being different, so we're not drawn in by their values. We have other values. So if you got a spare half hour, what do? Well, you can spend a spare half hour doing like this, or you can spend a spare half hour trying to make more money. Spend a spare half hour in the basement just learning Torah. That's also a possibility for a spare half hour. And not only that, you'll feel better, and you'll feel closer to connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So what's the problem? So the problem is that it's difficult. Don't ever let anybody tell you it isn't. The most difficult thing, anybody know what's the most difficult thing about learning? What's the single most difficult thing about learning? You're right, it's hard.
Starting.
That's it. Most difficult thing about learning is opening up the book. If you just open the book, open the Sefer, you'll see life is different. But open the Sefer. There's a famous story about a certain Rebbe who somebody was coming to town on the train back in Europe, and this Rav held that for something this man had done, he shouldn't greet him at the train station. He should not greet him at the train station. Problem is that he was concerned what was really motivating him, because you're really not supposed to greet this man. Apparently he had spoken Russian Harbor, so I don't know what the issue was. He was concerned, why shouldn't he greet him at the train station? Because he really shouldn't greet him, or because maybe he's a little lazy, he doesn't want to put on his coat and go out in the cold and everything. So you know what he did? He got in his horse and wagon with his coat, drove to the train station, and then at the train station he said, "You know what? I really shouldn't greet this guy." And he went back and turned around and went home. Because that takes away the personal bias that you have. Now I can make an objective decision. I don't feel like learning. Get in your car and drive over to the Kolo. Get in your car, drive over to the Kolo. Now, sit down and open up your Gemara or your Mishnayos. Now say, I don't feel like learning, then close your Gemara and go home. Then I respect you. But if you haven't done that, I don't feel like learning. Of course, you don't feel like learning. If you're sitting on a couch, with a can of peanuts in front of you, watching the Lakers lose, so of course you don't feel like what do you call? Of course you don't feel like what do you call, like learning. Of course not. Why would you feel like learning now? It's like the guy who's sitting down like, tomorrow I'm going to start jogging. One of these days I'm going to start jogging. When? I don't know. Sometime I'm going to start jogging. Well, tomorrow you're going to be. Why don't you start jogging now? No, not right now. Right now I got a can of beer and a can of peanuts and I'm watching the Lakers. Well, tomorrow's not going to be any different. Tomorrow's not going to be any different. So what do you do? Do it now. You want? I don't feel like learning. Of course you don't feel like learning. Go down to the yeshiva. Go down to the kollel. Get in your car. You got nice cars. Drive down to your car. They're certainly nicer than mine. I don't own one. Get down there. Come into the kollel. Sit down. Then you open up the safe. Open the safer before you. And then you say, I don't feel like learning now. I doubt you're going to do that. It's not that you don't feel like learning. You don't feel like moving. That's a big difference. I don't feel like learning. I don't feel like moving. I don't feel like breathing. That's what it really is. That's the difficulty. That's the challenge. Finally, one last point. Don't want those French fries to get cold. They're gonna get cold even if they're close to me. That just tempts me even more. But I appreciate it. The way. One last point. The Gemara says, Rabbi Preda. It says Zikno Shel Rabbi Preda. There's a man, Rabbi Preda's ancestor, was once walking, and he found a skull in the gates of Yerushalayim. Then the Gemara says that the skull was the skull of one of the kings, I think Yoachin. Forgot whose skull it was. So he saw a skull. So he took the skull and he buried it in the ground. And the skull popped itself out of the ground. So he buried the skull again and the skull popped itself out of the ground again. So he took the skull, he brought it home, and he wrapped it up in silk and he put it in a box. One day his wife was looking through his stuff. Could be it was there based on cleaning. His wife was looking through his stuff, and also she finds a skull. She know what the skull was. More in Sanhedrin. So what does the wife do? She asks the neighbor. His neighbor says, that's the skull of his first wife. He can't forget her. That's his token, it's his memento of his first wife. We don't know that he had a first wife. We don't know that. I mean, what else could the skull be? It must be the first wife. So the wife says she doesn't want her husband thinking about his first wife, so she takes the skull and she burns it. She incinerates the skull. That's what the Gemara says. Okay. I had a question. Over here. Imagine you saw a skull. What would you do with the skull? You saw a skull. I'm a Kohen, so I wouldn't go near it. What would you do if I saw a skull lying in the street? I'd move in the opposite direction. Okay, let's say you're a better man than I. So you go and you bury the skull. The skull pops itself out of the ground. Then what would you do? Right? The last thing I would do is try to get involved with that skull and bury it again. And he buries it again. And then the skull pops out of the ground again. So what does he do? He takes it home. I wouldn't take a double popping skull. I would not take home with me. That's for sure. And he takes the skull home with him. Well, he takes the skull home. He takes it home. Okay? Now, you know what's interesting here? He has a descendant. You know what the Gemara calls him? The Gemara says, Zikno Shel Rebbe Preda. Why don't you tell me who the man is? It says he's the grandfather, the ancestor of Rebbe Preda. You know what the Gemara says about Rebbe Preda? The Gemara says Rebbe Preda had a Talmud that didn't understand. He had to teach the Talmud every single thing 400 times. 400 times every lesson. Where does Rebbe Preda get the energy to persevere and teach that Talmud 400 times? If you have a grandfather who's willing to try pushing a skull into the ground twice, the genes pass down to the grandson. And then the grandson is dealing with a skull will teach him 400 times. He'll work with him 400 times. That, my friends, is the lesson. It's not easy. Nothing is going to be easy when it comes to ruchnius. Not learning Torah, not getting into your car and driving over. None of it's easy. But if you get past that first stage, then you get into the habit of doing it. Once you're in the habit of doing it, it becomes easier, it becomes habit forming. But the trick is to take that first step. Not to allow ourselves, I once heard Rabbi Tatz said, when you wake up in the morning, your alarm clock goes off and you decide you need extra sleep. You want to sleep a little longer? Don't make the decision while you're horizontal. Don't make the decision horizontal. Sit up, stand up, then make the decision. You know what? I'm going back to sleep now. Okay, that's a more unbiased opinion. If you're on a winter morning, well, it's LA, so I guess, but on a cold morning, and you're under the blanket, and you're horizontal in Israel, it's that frigid winter morning in Israel, and you're horizontal, gee, I think I'd like to sleep a little longer. No kid. No kid. I mean, everybody knows going to sleep trumps waking up any day. You know, they say, gee, I'd like to sleep a little longer. Of course you would. Stand up and then make the decision. That's the goal when it comes to Torah. That's the goal when it comes to mitzvahs. Realize there are little crumbs all over the place. They're just waiting to be plucked. All it takes is a little more effort, a little strength. Push ourselves a little bit. And the benefit is then we have the satisfaction of having done it, because much of it is volunteer. All right. Point that the other direction now, because I'm going to eat French fries.
Yeah, I could turn it around. Can we ask some questions, David?
Yeah, but is the camera still on?
Is it okay if it's on?
Yeah, sure. Any questions?
With a question?
How much?